Ray, I want to first start off by asking you about these calls for the United States to help and escort Philippine ships going to resupply their own vessels in the South China Sea.
Well, the discussion about escort has been going on for actually quite some time. And the United States has been open about its willingness to consider doing this. And the Philippines has actually apparently been the one balking at the idea of bringing in the United States. I think, and part of that may be simply that the Philippines doesn't necessarily want to fire that arrow from its quiver until it needs to. There have been discussions about whether bringing in the United States in that particular way uh, somehow deprives the Philippines of its own agency. But on the other hand, why do you have a mutual defense treaty if you can't invoke it for things like this? The gray holes that China has been sort of shadowing a lot of the Philippine missions with Navy ships for a while, but they tend to stay further away on the horizon, so that there's not a direct interaction between the Philippine ships, Philippine Coast Guard ships, and the Philippine fishery ships, and those gray holes.
In a previous interview that we did, you talked about the difference between white holes, which is the Coast Guard, and gray holes, which is the Navy. In this situation, when we talk about the escort, is this going to be the U.S. Navy getting involved or the U.S. Coast Guard getting involved?
Well, if there it does turn out to be escort, that will be one of the discussions. Now having a Coast Guard escort for a U.S. Coast Guard escort for a Philippine Coast Guard mission would be obviously a new thing, and that would be a long conversation. There are a couple of limitations there. One was just sort of doctrinal and sort of under what the U.S. Coast Guard is accustomed to doing. So providing escort to another Coast Guard through a hostile situation, that would be new. And there's also a resource problem: is that there's not a lot of U.S. Coast Guard ships that frequent this part of the world. So, the, now again, if you bring in the U.S. Navy, then the question is it the Philippine Navy that's conducting the resupply, and what is the role of the Philippine Coast Guard? So, there are a lot of things to work out in that context.